ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا وسندنا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وذكر فإن الذكر تنفع المؤمنين صدق الله العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وترحم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأمته أجمعين كما صليت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. Last night I spoke on a topic which is the benefit of good company and the negative effects of bad company. And in my mind, I had planned this actually as a two-part talk. And so today is about being alone. But I also understand that the majority of people here tonight were not there last night. But I can recognize our old friends from TMC from our last visit. So a human being is in one of two states. One is that they're with other people, and the other is that they're alone. Today I'm going to talk about when a person is alone. Because Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said in the authentic hadith that being in good company is better than being alone, and being alone is better than being in bad company. All right? The first part of the hadith was yesterday. The second part of the hadith is today. Being alone is better than bad company. The reason I want to talk about this is that no doubt Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he says is always absolutely correct. However, in a way, some of us, the way we behave when we are alone, the sins that we do when we are alone are so horrific, are so devastating, that sometimes we alone are actually worse than had we been in bad company, but in public, because at least being in public there was some level of haya, but when we were alone, we fell into sin. And the reality is that you can only be alone in one meaning, which means you're alone from makhluk, from the rest of creation, but you can never be alone in another meaning. You can never be alone or away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, many, many years ago, I used to explain this in the following way, that you can close all the doors and draw all the blinds and erase all the histories. But if you think that you are going to do the sin alone, actually all you are doing is creating a situation where you are one-on-one with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you are sinning in front of Him alone. You are not alone. You are sinning in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone and not any of creation. Now when you understand it like that, Allahu Akbar Kabira, you will understand how important it is to be alone. How important it is to be on taqwa when you are alone. If you ask me, one of the major differences between us and another group of mu'mineen who are called muttaqeen mu'mineen, salihin mu'mineen, one major difference is not that there are no masajid anymore today, that people don't pray in public today, that there's no salah in jama'ah today. There's still today, and that was still there. The difference is, what did they do when they were alone, and what do you and I do when we are alone? This is the difference. It's a very big difference. It's a huge difference. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains in Quran al-Kareem, Man khashiya ar-Rahman bil-ghayb. I often use this verse to explain to myself the feeling a person should have when they're alone. Bil ghayb is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unseen. You cannot perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And what does that mean? That means sometimes we forget about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Doesn't mean we become atheist. It doesn't mean we deny the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we end up in what's called nisyan and what's called ghafla. We become unaware of the reality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-khabir, al-basir, al-sami'. And actually, if you think about this, this is first grade Sunday school Islam. First grade weekend school Islam. This is what we teach children, that Allah ta'ala is all seeing and He's all hearing, right? And He's all aware. But this isn't just to translate. The purpose of deen isn't just to translate the words, Khabir, Basir, and Samia. It means to behave in a way that you always know, and I'm going to add, especially when you're alone, you know and remember that I'm not alone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all aware, all watchful, all listening to me. Just think if we could learn this first grade weekend school lesson and remember this when we were alone, how different our lives would be. Let's just think of some creation. How do you behave when you're alone with some member of creation who you give some status? So if you're alone with a teacher, alone with the principal, alone with your grandfather, maybe if there's 10 other people, then you might sit on your phone, right? Be distracted, do some ghafla. But if it's just you and that person alone, you behave differently, right? You raise your level, you raise your game. Because when you're alone with that makhluk, then you remember, you become aware of them and you are intimately aware of their awareness with you. Infinitely more, right? There's not even a qiyas, there's no analogy. Infinitely more, the muttaqeen mu'mineen, the salihin mu'mineen, when they're alone, it means they become intimately aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you don't start surfing when you're alone. You don't start scrolling when you're alone. You don't start binge watching things when you're alone. It's a different way of living. In fact, mashallah, the muttaqeen, salihin, mu'mineen would be waiting for that. They would be waiting for the night when they would be alone from creation. They would wake up in the night in Qiyam al-Layl and Tahajjud. Why? Because that was their alone time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They also like to be alone. Today the person likes to be alone so I can surf on my own, do screen on my own. Nobody's going to bother me. Nobody's going to ask me. My parents not going to say anything to me. For a different reason, the person today likes to be alone. And the muttaqeen, salihin, mu'mineen, for a completely different reason, like to be alone. And that's life-changing. It's not some small thing, right? I know praying tahajjud, for example, is not fard. But what I'm trying to say is these things are life-changing. How we behave when we are alone. Second thing, that sometimes people say that they're lonely. Okay? And being alone is one word. It's a different word in English. And being lonely is something else. That's another difference. The muttaqeen, salihin, mu'mineen, when they're alone, they don't feel lonely. They go back to their asl, their ubudiyya, their ta'luq ma'allah. And us, because we're creatures of the dunya, this way to test yourself, right? Is when we're alone, we feel lonely. Feel lonely. Even a person will say, I feel sad. Even a person might say, I feel depressed. Why? Because we go back, we have made our asl. That I'm so embedded, so interconnected, so enmeshed and intertwined in this world, that if you leave me alone, I feel lonely. Allahu Akbar. I don't think any of these muttaqeen ever felt lonely when they were alone. They loved it. Because they would go straight to their musalla. They didn't feel alone, actually. Because remember, they remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they didn't feel lonely because they were conversing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, one beautiful word in Arabic for dua is munajat. heartfelt, intimate pleas and cries and supplications. This is what they would do when they were alone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there is none more true, none about whom this is more true than Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And his life is the most excellent way of being alone and the most excellent way of being in company. And his whole life he alternated between these two states. All the day working in the Sahaba, spreading the deen, teaching the deen, and at night alone in his ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Mu'mineen say that Aisha radhiyallahu anha, she's just an eyewitness to this. And she would even say that he would be so enmeshed, so focused in his ibadah, he wouldn't forget me. Allahu Akbar. But then what would happen? Doesn't mean that he would, forget his ummah. Every day this cycle happens. Every day this cycle happens. At night and in the last third of the night, alone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, coming out, leading the Sahaba in Fajr, and all day being in their company. And then again at night being alone, and then again in company. And then again at night being alone, and then again in company. And interestingly, you and me also go through the same cycle. All day you might spend it in work or office or shop or market or university or college or school or family. And at night, in some sense, in your home and in your bedroom, you're relatively alone. You have the opportunity to wake up and even be alone, maybe in a private corner or private room of your house. But all of us know that the majority of time that we are alone, we fall into things, at the very least, that is ghafla, or that is pointless, or even worse, we fall into things that are sinful. Then practically speaking, what happens to this person who is alone and then lonely, then they develop this next stage of, it's like a hardening of the heart. So one is the antisocial behavior, right? But the second is a hardening of the heart that they can't feel empathy for other people. They can't feel the pain of the suffering of other people in the ummah. They can't even feel, even if it's a man, it's a father, he can't even feel that, okay, I should be spending time with my wife, I should go to sleep now so I could wake up, I could make breakfast for my children. They become disconnected from even their core family, the reality. It's just lost in their own world. So alone, lonely, antisocial, depressed. Then some people go to another extreme, is they say that I'm alone, I want to be alone, I want to remain alone, I want no one, I want to do nothing. So we call this extreme apathy. They become disinterested in deen and dunya, both. They be just completely disinterested in life. And sometimes they will come and say, I don't have motivation, I don't have passion. Then sometimes they have these existential crises. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why I'm on earth. Allahu Akbar. A mu'min asking this question? A mu'min who knows that I'm here to be the slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? A mu'min who knows وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, having existential crisis while being sad and lonely and alone? Do you think the muttaqeen, salihin, mu'min go through this when they're alone? I don't know what I'm doing in life. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know where I'm going. Allah. So many ways. So many ways. How different this state of being is. And this can affect men, it can affect women, it can affect people who are younger, it can affect people who are older. All right. What's the way out? Right? The way out is, number one, to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if anybody ever feels this situation, if you want to know the power of dhikr, people want it, tell me the power of dhikr that I'm going to, no. The real power of dhikr is that it takes us away from its opposite, that it takes us away from ghafla. That's the power of dhikr you want. Don't think I'm going to get some super amazing thing. It's very simple. I want to be able to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost, to undo and roll back this reality that I have forgotten Him. I want to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when I'm alone, so I can undo this fact that I seem to forget Him when I'm alone. This is why you make the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this situation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in so many places in Quran al-Kareem has made this very clear. Huwa ma'akum aynama kuntum. The ma'iyyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you wherever you may be, however you may be, in whatever condition you may be. He is with you when you are alone. He is with you when you're in company. He is with you when you are praying salah in the masjid. He is with you when you're in your room thinking of doing sin. He is with you, watching you, debating whether to do the sin or not. He is with you when you make the wrong decision and make the intention to do the sin. He is with you during the entire action when you do the sin. He is with you when after the sin you feel the nadma, the remorse and regret of doing the sin. He is with you then when you turn to Him and in His rahmah, He is with you and He inspires you to turn to Him and seek forgiveness for His sin. Ya Allah. Huwa ma'akum aynama kuntum. وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we are intimately closer to you than your own self. You can never be alone. Never be alone. So when you make any dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you say the word subhanallah, but with meaning and feeling. You're magnifying the majesty and beauty and splendor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is so amazing, so beautiful, so wondrous. This is what it means to say subhanallah. You say alhamdulillah. You're magnifying the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's so praiseworthy. He's done everything for me. He's my everything. He's my one and only. Yeah. He's my one and only Allah. And I'm His abd. You can talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like that. Ya Allah, you have millions of ibad. You have billions of ibad. You are my one and only. I have only one you. You have billions who are better than me. I have only one you. Alhamdulillah, you remembered me. Today when you distributed risk in this world, and you had so many millions of mu'mineen who are better than me, but you still remembered me. You gave me something to eat. When you distributed who gets to pray salah on this day, you remembered me. Me, you let me pray 5 salah. You could even just sit there in amazement and shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya Allah, today I prayed 5 salah. This is you, it's not me. I'm nothing. Alhamdulillah, you Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you gave me tawfiq. وَمَا تَوْفِيقِ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. You chose to grace me with the ability to do sajda to you. This is dhikr. This is to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lovingly, with longing, with yearning, with talab, with raghba, with inaba. There's a whole vocabulary in Arabic in the Quran for these feelings. Longing, yearning, missing, remembering, loving. This is what a person does when they're alone. Ask the person who is in haram love, what does he do when he's alone? Allahu Akbar. Never say, I can't get her off of my mind. Allahu Akbar. The person, they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it snaps you out. Even if you don't go any further, you just remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, go to sleep, no problem. You don't have to take it very far. You don't have to go very deep. Don't expect always so much out of your dhikr. It's enough just to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and erase the ghafla. That's a big deal. It's enough. It's a nur that will take away the dhulamat. It's a light that will remove the darkness of that loneliness and sadness and grief and depression. Just to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just to remember that He gave me the gift of iman. That I am a believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just remember that He is my Rabb and I am His abd. Ya la anta rabbi wa ana abduk. That's it. Just say that. It's enough. It will cleanse all the sadness. You are my Rabb and I am your abd. Subhanallah. You know, people in this world, they get so happy if they're connected to something or identify with something. Allah Ta'ala gave us connection to Him, that we are His ibad and He is our Rabb. If you remember last time when we came and we did the Salah workshop, we explained this one word, Rabbi. Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, Rabbi, you are my Rabb. The Ya comes for possession, you are mine. Hazrat was teaching us that my slave, when you pray to me, I want you to say to me that you are mine. Subhana Rabbi, my Rabb, you're mine. Allahu Akbar. You begin with Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, that Allah is Rabb of the Alameen, and in Ruku and Sujood, Rabbi is my Rabb. Ya Allah, it befits you to be Rabbul Alameen. That's your sha'an. It befits your might and splendor to be Rabbul Alameen, to be Rabbi Kaaba, to be Rabbi Rasul. But Ya Allah, you also want to be known as Rabbi, as my Rabb? Allahu Akbar. This is called dhikr. To remember Allah. I gave you a few ways to do it. There's so many ways you can do it. Almost every verse in Quran can guide you to do it. Every feeling mentioned in Quran can make you do it. Every teaching of deen can make you do it. It's not confined to any one word, any one method. To remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you are alone. To remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you feel lonely. To remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you're alone and you're thinking of committing sin. So it doesn't mean the muttaqeen, mu'mineen were in the same situation as you and me. They're not some other creation. They also were tempted to do sin. They also faced difficulty. The difference, again, I'm saying, is that they would remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they were alone. That's it. That's the difference. Now, if you understand this, it's so easy then to make the change. It's not a difficult thing to do. It's very light. As the ulama, they say, dhikr is khafif. It's very light, it's accessible, it's easy to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it easy to remember Him. That's why the ulama of tafsir says the only thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Quran, do kathir. Uzkurullaha dhikran kathira. Why? Because it's khafif. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abundantly. Why? Because it's very light. Right? Faqru ma tayassara min al-Quran. You recite Quran, but Quran is thaqeel, so whatever is easy for you. But dhikr, uzkurullaha dhikran kathira. Because it's very light. Anybody can. All mu'mineen have access. Just because of nafs iman. Just because of the one drop of bare minimum iman is enough to enable you to easily remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the cure for the loneliness and sadness that happens to a person. Second, not second, but when another thing a person does in this modern age when they're alone is they start thinking. Maybe they're thinking about their worries, right? Whatever their worry is, their issue is, their difficulty is, their trauma is, their grief is, their situation, their adversity, some enmity, the mind kicks in, right? And then people say, I was just staring at the wall and I was just thinking, I was looking out the window and I was just thinking. Okay, so there's not a situation, alhamdulillah, they're not doing any sin, right? They're not in ghafla, they're not surfing, they're not doing. They're alone, but what are they doing? They're not thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're thinking about their situation. That's not haram. That's the natural thing. Okay? They're thinking about their situation. All right. Starts like that. They keep thinking about the situation. Keep thinking about the situation. Difference. Muttaqeen, Salihin, Mu'mineen, also, when they were alone, they would think about their situation. Difference is that when they would think about their difficulty and worry, they would then turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe they would pray 2 rakats salatul hajjah and then make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe even without praying the 2 rakats, they would simply make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe even without making formal dua with their tongue, they would just talk to Allah ta'ala in their heart. Us, what do? We begin in the same thing. We start thinking and thinking, but we don't make that shift. We just keep thinking, keep analyzing whatever it is, and then we go to sleep. Allahu Akbar. And again, I told you the difference is easy. It's very easy to make that change. Even just one sentence. Again, I'm telling you, it's so light. Just one sentence. Ya Allah, just remove this burden. Even that is enough. Anything. Don't just sit there and ruminate, right, over the difficulty that you have. All right. Then I want to show you some inspirational stories from some of the stories of the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in. So, Sayyidina Bilal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, if you know his story, after he accepted the deen of Islam, so he was originally, at that time he was in the ownership, slavery of Umayyah, right? One of these leaders of the disbelievers. So what happened was that Sayyidina Bilal had accepted Islam, and interesting, now I'm going to explain the story specifically in the theme of being alone. What did he do? He thought he was alone in the sense of the creation wasn't seeing him, and he prayed salah. But it turned out that Umayyah caught him or saw him, right? So Sayyidina Bilal was trying to practice Islam secretly, and he was waiting, as I said, waiting to be alone, and he finally thought he was alone. And what did he do? He started praying salah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahu Akbar. Can you imagine? Just think, you and me, we don't have this issue, right? You don't have to hide your Islam. You don't have to secretly pray, right? You don't have a master over you who is a tyrant that you have to wait to be alone to pray salah. Just think of the difference. How much shukr you should do for the freedom of religion that you have. Okay, Sayyidina Bilal thinks he's alone. He starts praying salah, and then Umayyah finds out. What does Umayyah do? He starts torturing him. Famous story. Alright? Takes him out in the heat of the desert and starts torturing him. Okay. Starts torturing him. Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq finds out. And then torturing Sayyidina Bilal and Sayyidina Bilal and telling him to, at least from his tongue, renounce deen. Give up on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Torturing him until you give up on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Torturing, give up on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and other Sahaba Kiram, they find out. Okay, initially they couldn't do anything. And Sayyidina Bilal, he keeps getting tortured, and then what he does, Allahu Akbar. Then what does he do? Now he's not alone, he's with Umayyah. What does he do? He does the opposite. Instead of renouncing his faith, he starts calling out Ahad, 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 the one and only Allah. That was his zikr. It can be any word, it can be any, he could have, but this is what he chose. He just kept saying Ahad, 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 Ahad. Allahu Akbar. What did he do in that situation? He did the zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This infuriated further Umayyah. And Umayyah started torturing him more. And then finally, Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gathered some funds and told Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq to go and just purchase his freedom from Umayyah. Right? Different accounts of that, but purchase the freedom of Umayyah. One account I read was that Sayyidina Bilal then ultimately passed out because of the torture. When he passed out, but then Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq with the money collected, purchased his freedom, took him, and then when Sayyidina Bilal opened his eyes, who did he see? Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And then he was told, that you are free. You are free. Now, I don't know the rest of the story. I'm going to fill it in for you. I want you to ask yourself, what do you think? Now that Sayyidina Bilal is free and no longer has to wait until he's secretly alone to pray, how much ibadah you think he did of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And then when Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam chose him to be the mu'adhin, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted him to be the mu'adhin, you think there was some contest? All Sahaba auditioned for who gives the best adhan? Do you think it was based on husn al-sawt? This is something else. This is a different matter. This is a different affair altogether. But where did this whole journey begin? It began what I was telling you earlier. That when he was alone he made salah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's how it began for him. That ended up being it was a very unfortunate initial process, but it ended up being the means for him to get his freedom and live as a free sahabi, with the Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then became the muazzin. Muazzin in Medina, muazzin of the deen, muazzin in Sahaba, muazzin Rasul, muazzin in Ummah. Allahu Akbar. Radiyallahu ta'ala an. He remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he was alone. Sayyidah Hajra, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, he leaves her alone. Leaves her alone. And there's no mention. And once I tried, I couldn't find, there's no mention of, I used to wonder, what did Nabi Ibrahim say? What did he say to her exactly? Right? He just leaves her. Okay? She's left alone. Wadi ghayr zi zar'in, in a valley that has no vegetation, nothing, barren land, and also no water. She's alone. She starts moving here, going up Safa, moving here, going up Marwa, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, leaves the baby, is looking at the baby, running so she can look at the baby. All of you know, because all of us, we do that now, naqal. We imitate that when we do sa'i in Umrah and Hajj. It's this one woman alone, she made this harakah. And she remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then baby Ismail alayhi salam, he banged his heels on the ground. The water came out that is now known as Zamzam. And it's part of our experience. Every person from the Ummah, alhamdulillah, who goes on Umrah and Hajj, drinks Zamzam and will make sa'i. I remember the first time I went was 2002. So I was 29 years old. And I was also very excited to drink Zamzam even, right? I was so excited that when I go there, and I remember so I will share something with you. When I became religious, it may sound strange to you, but I was able to do it at that time, even though it was 2002 in the late 90s. I had this niyat that I don't want to see any picture of Masjid Nabawi or Kaaba. I want to see it live. I think I may have once seen the Kaaba, some picture on some musalla, but I tried my best. I never saw a picture or video of these. I was 100% successful about Masjid Nabawi. I remember when I was looking out the window of the bus, I had no idea what to expect whatsoever. I'd never seen a picture of the outside, the green dome, inside, Roda, nothing. Never had I seen anything. And even though I had seen the pictures of the Kaaba and the Musalla, I had no concept of what Safa, Marwa, this looks like, and Sa'i, and nothing. Allahu Akbar. And I just remembered that when I was doing this Sa'i for the first time, I was remembering this story, because all of us know the story of Sayyidah Hajar radhiyallahu anha. One woman with one fikr of her baby, making one dhikr of her one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved it so much that I'm doing it. I'm moving in that direction and I'm getting to drink the Zamzam. What do we do when we're alone, when there's an issue with our child? And I speak as a parent, right? Because it's an issue, it's a baby, but it's parent concern about the baby. That's what Sayyidah Hajar done us. Sometimes people, they get alone and they just get worried and they keep talking and talking. They don't make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their parents should come and say, oh, my child, my son or daughter, they don't pray. If you ask them, how much dua have you made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that your children pray? Have you been praying Salatul Hajj every night? I said, what do you mean? I said, well, what have you been doing? Right? They haven't been turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They just freeze when they're alone. Drift, almost like overwhelmed, incapacitated by whatever difficulty or worry or sadness they have. All right. Now I want to talk about another way of being alone, which is what I had called the power of being alone, the benefit of being alone. And what I mean, what I should say is this, that there are some cases, just now I'm going to just tell you maybe some overall life experience. There are some cases in life when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be alone. Allahu Akbar. And if you try to go against that flow, generally, if there's anything in your circumstance Allah wants you in, and you don't realize that and submit to that, and humble yourself in front of that, you try to counter that, it'll be very difficult for you. So there's some cases when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be alone. One reason is it's part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hidayah. It's a part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance. Sometimes a person gets caught up, embroiled in so many things. There's so much mess in their life. And that mess has now become so much that if they were to try to sort out that mess, they won't be able to rationally do it in a level of asbab. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can pluck that. It's actually His hidayah, but it's painful. It's painful. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will pluck that person and put that person alone. So then what you should feel is like this, that okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took me out of all this. Allah ta'ala picked me up, took me out, put me alone. I'm just doing this metaphorically. Allah ta'ala put me alone. So the way you should view this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're going to laugh if I say it to you. I'm thinking maybe we shouldn't say all this personal stuff. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me all to Himself. This is what you should think. When you find yourself all of a sudden alone, the way you can process this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me all to Himself. Alhamdulillah. But you can only do this if when you're alone, you make that dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you make ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you don't do that, the things I said in the first part, when you find yourself in this situation, Allah ta'ala puts you alone, you will just be in shock and you will fall in depression and it will be incapacitating. So again, in this type of situation, there's a certain power in being alone. Another reason sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does this is not when the person's life is a mess, but actually the person is very successful. The person is outwardly, apparently achieving, overachieving, exceeding their own expectations and plans. Allahu Akbar. Sometimes one also away, sometimes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hidayah. He takes that person out of that success and puts him alone. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to teach that person, remind that person to have the humility, to have the submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to not think that there's something, but to remember that they are nothing and Allah ta'ala is everything, and if I'm anything, it's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made me something. But they forgot that because they were so successful, so dynamic, so accomplished. They started to think exactly the way I said it, that I am accomplished. This is my success. I achieved this. So again, I would say the same thing. A person should think that now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me all to Himself. These are two situations where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can put a person alone. Third, but this it's going to be rare for you and me, but this happens with the Anbiya alayhim as-salam ajma'in. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put some of the Anbiya alayhim as-salam ajma'in alone. Because He gives them some darajat like that. Like let's say Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was alone. First he had those fellow prisoners, right? And then one was killed and one was, released and given a place of status. And he was alone. Before that, Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam was alone in the well, earlier in the story. So but that was a short period, and the prison was a long period of being alone. Now again, there's no verse of Quran Hadith that specifically says this. But if me and you both know, what do you think Yusuf alayhi salam was doing alone in all those years in the jail? Obviously he was making the ibadah and zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it went on and on and on. Nabi Yunus alayhi salam was alone in the belly of the whale. And Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as Imam Bukhari has mentioned in his beginning of his book, Bab Kayfa Kana Bad'ul Wahi, the first section of the book of the Sahih is on the beginning of Wahi. And the first thing, right, in a sense, a kind of Wahi that came before Iqra is Ru'yat al-Salih, that Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam started to see some type of virtuous, pious dreams. And that's what inspired him to adopt this khalwa, or to go into seclusion or retreat or solitude in the cave in Mount Hira. And as he was then alone, again, you and me both know what he was doing, right? Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was in a way reaching out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of those pious dreams that he got. And then Allah ta'ala was actually raising him in his darajat, and then sent Angel Jibreel to him and gifted him wahi of Quran al-Kareem. So with the Anbiya alayhim as-salam ajma'in, you see a totally different level. Then you have the story in Quran al-Kareem that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned of Asiyah radiyallahu anha, who was the very noble and very pious wife of the very tyrannical, very evil Fir'aun. And then her dua that she made to Allah Ta'ala when she was alone. These were private duas that she made, and Allah Ta'ala included that in his kalamullah. Azali abadi kalamullah. If anybody wants to ask what's the maqam, what's the status of women in Islam, he said the women are so beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the woman alone makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because she had this Fir'aun on her, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved that dua so much that he made it part of kalamullah, kitabullah. But ultimately that dua was when? When she was alone. And she was alone. So many examples. So we gave from previous ummahs, right? Sayyida Haji radhiyallahu anha, Sayyida Asi radhiyallahu anha, from Sahaba, from previous Anbiya, what they used to do when they were alone. That's it. And then we ask ourselves again, what do you and I do when we are alone? It's not a question you answer to me. It's a question you ask yourself and you answer to yourself. And I ask myself and I answer to myself. And I'm no better just because I can come up with these points and say it to you. I'm no better alone than when you are alone. But I realize this, and so I need to fix how I am alone. I thought I would share with you some things that I'm trying to figure out, how to be better alone, so maybe you can also learn from those tips. Another, maybe the last thing I will do for tonight is one very beautiful thing from Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, was that when he was alone, let me try to explain this to you in a deeper way. When Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam was alone and in his special time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and none of us can imagine what that is. وَأَوْحَى إِلَىٰ عَبْدِكَ مَا أَوْحَى. And that can suggest that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam kalamullah, but it's also suggesting ma awha, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed what Allah alone knows, all that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed. Right? We're not talking about some other wahi, but we're talking about some feelings of closeness, of qurb, right? That Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam would feel with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether when he was praying his salah, or in his tahajjud, or making dua. Right? Can you imagine? Like if me and you pray a salah, may Allah ta'ala give us tawfiq, where we feel close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? We would think maybe I would do something or feel something that sometimes people call fana or istighraq. Like I'm so deeply absorbed in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I forget everything else, right? That sounds like a beautiful thing, right? To do your remembrance of Allah ta'ala in your salah, in your dua, in your ibadah, reciting Quran, even listening to Quran, that I'm so much remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I forgot everything else. However, Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he taught us another sunnah, that in that special moment when you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so deeply that you forget everything else, then you remember the ummah and make dua for the ummah. Because every time, this is my feeling, that every time Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam made dua for this ummah, he was a Nabi. And having a moment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that could have just been his own intimate private moment, but he didn't want to forget everything else. In that special moment, there was some one thing he wanted to still remember, and that was his ummah. Allahu Akbar. And that is another tragically difference between you and I and the muttaqeen and salihin they're alone. We also lost, maybe not entirely, but many of us have largely lost the ability to remember the ummah when we are alone. And you should actually think that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed me with this free time, where I'm free from whatever worldly duties, worldly occupation, tasks, and I have this time when I'm alone, and there's an ummah, be that the Ahl Gaza and Palestine, be that the Rohingya, be that the Uyghurs, be that the Ahl Sudan, be that any and all of the Madlumin, Muta'assirin, they are not even being granted even one lamha, one moment of peace. They are constantly under attack, constantly under fear of attack. They don't even have a moment of peace. And Allah Ta'ala has given me this whole weekend, this whole holiday, this whole summer break. So much, so much free, spare, relaxed, safe, protected time. People talk about the protected time. I've been given so much protected time. Could I not at least remember the ummah of my Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Could I not remember Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself by sending salawat on him? Just think that, make dua to Allah Ta'ala, Ya Allah, let me remember my Nabi with salawat the same way my Nabi used to remember me with dua. Because every relationship is beautiful when it's two-way. It's not one-way, two-way. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he took the first move, he initiated with his love for the ummah. Like Hafiz Ammar recited, Harisun alaykum. Allahu Akbar. He is deeply desirous of the ummah. This Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Kalamullah, Kitabullah describing the feelings of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the ummah. So we have to take the one way and make it two way. We have to love Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we have to love the ummah the way Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved the ummah. Even if that's all we did, even I could even end on this. Even if all we did when we were alone is do that dhikr I said of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anyway, send some salawat al Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and make dua for the ummah, you will see a change in your heart, a change in your life, a change in the quality of our deen and our iman. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of us tawfiq to become better when we are alone, to become better when we're around others. May He make us true to all of our friends, our family, our communities, our masajid, our fellow musallin in our masajid. And may Allah Ta'ala make us true mu'mineen, true salihin mu'mineen, muttaqeen mu'mineen, dhakireen mu'mineen. Wa akhir da'wana. And alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.